The night air carried the bite of winter, sharp enough to sting his cheeks as he walked alone down the old dirt road. His shoes scuffed against the uneven earth, each step kicking up tiny clouds of dust that the wind quickly stole away. His pockets were empty, truly empty, not even a few coins to jingle, but somehow they felt heavier than any backpack he had ever carried. The weight wasn't in fabric or straps. It was in the absence. The absence of possibilities. Around him, the small neighborhood glowed with soft yellow light spilling from windows. Inside those houses, life moved forward in ordinary, beautiful ways. He could hear it all: the low murmur of a television, sudden bursts of laughter, the clink of plates being set on a table, the warm voice of a mother calling her children to dinner. Those sounds wrapped around the houses like blankets, but none of them reached him. They belonged to other people. Not to the man whose hands were cracked and gray with dried cement, whose shoulders ached from another 12-hour day. He stopped beneath a flickering street lamp and looked down at those hands. The skin was rough, the knuckles swollen, the nails broken and stained. These were not the hands of a boy anymore. These were the hands of someone who had already worked more years than he had truly lived. He flexed his fingers slowly, feeling every tiny cut and callus. For a moment, the world narrowed to just those hands and the cold wind whispering across them. No one saw him standing there. No spotlight. No applause. No one leaning out a window to say, "Look at that young man, he's about to become something." The street stayed quiet except for the wind and his own breathing. Yet right there, on that cracked sidewalk between two rows of simple houses, something without a name was quietly being born. A force. A decision. A refusal to stay exactly where the world had told him he belonged. He pulled in a deep breath, so deep it almost became a sob, and swallowed it down. It wasn't only the missing money that hurt. Money came and went. What crushed him was the constant feeling of running behind everyone else, always one step, 1 year, one opportunity too late. Still, he kept walking. One foot in front of the other. Because stopping would have been worse than the cold. He had grown up in a house so small the dreams had to take turns breathing. When it rained, water found every weakness in the roof and dripped into buckets placed like soldiers across the floor. The old refrigerator rattled and hummed all night long, louder than any lullaby, yet it held more air than food. Some evenings the only dinner was rice scraped from the bottom of the pot, a little salt, and silence. The kind of silence that presses on a child's chest and teaches him really what hunger really sounds like. At school he wore the same pair of sneakers every single day of the year. The canvas had split along the sides, the soles were thin as paper. He learned to walk with his eyes on the ground, not because he was humble, but because eye contact invited questions he didn't want to answer. Questions like, "Why do your shoes look like that?" Or the worst kind, the pitying silence that followed when kids noticed. By 16 he was already hunting for real work. The first boss laughed gently and said, "Come back when you have experience, son." At 18 another man shook his head, "We need qualified people." At 20 the same words came again, only sharper, "You're already behind, kid." The world moves fast, so he took whatever came, loading boxes until his back screamed, mopping floors in empty offices at midnight, delivering packages on a bicycle with no brakes. Every month the money disappeared like smoke. Rent, electricity, the little bit of food that never quite filled the fridge. Whenever he dared speak his dreams out loud, maybe studying something, maybe starting his own small repair business, people laughed. Not cruelly, but the way adults laugh at children who say they want to be astronauts. "Be realistic," they said, patting his shoulder. And slowly, quietly, he began to wonder if they were right. Maybe the dreams were too big for someone like him. Maybe the dirt road was the only road he would ever walk. The doubts arrived like uninvited guests, polite at first, then impossible to ignore. Maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe I wasn't born with whatever it takes. Maybe this really is my place in the world. Night after night he lay on the thin mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the refrigerator's endless complaint. On his phone, friends posted photos of new jobs, new clothes, new cities. Their lives looked like bright highways while his felt like a dead-end street. The fear of trying and failing again grew larger than the tiredness in his bones. Each rejection letter, each polite "no," became another voice inside his head whispering the same cruel truth: you don't have what it takes. There was one night, the darkest one, when he almost quit everything. He sat on the edge of the bed and thought, just take any steady job. Stop dreaming. Be invisible. At least invisible doesn't hurt as much as hoping. He even reached for his phone to delete the list of courses he had saved. His thumb hovered over the screen. One tap and the dreams would be gone. But something stopped him. Not loud ambition. Just a small, stubborn restlessness deep in his chest. A feeling that every ache, every empty pocket, every long walk home had been whispering a lesson he still hadn't learned to hear. So he started paying attention differently. He watched. He listened. He noticed tiny doors that had always been there but had seemed too small to walk through. And the question inside him changed shape. Instead of, "Why is this happening to me?" it became something quieter, braver. "What is this trying to teach me?" The turning point didn't arrive with trumpets or dramatic music. It arrived on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that usually slips past without anyone remembering its name. He was slumped at the bus stop, back curved like an old man's, hands black with grease from the factory floor. His uniform stuck to his skin from sweat that had dried hours ago. The sun had already disappeared behind the buildings, but the asphalt still breathed heat upward, thick and heavy. His mind was a storm of overdue bills, an almost empty refrigerator, and the exhausting feeling of running on a treadmill that never moved forward. Two men sat nearby, talking loudly, laughing between every sentence. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop. He was too tired for new hope, but their voices carried anyway. Then one word cut through the noise like a bright light: course. He kept his eyes on the ground, but his ears stayed open. It was a free technical course in industrial maintenance. Night classes. 1 year. Limited spots. A local company had partnered with the school. The best students would get internship recommendations. The words floated in the warm evening air, simple and impossible at the same time. Fear bloomed instantly in his chest. Not excitement, fear. Fear of walking into a classroom full of people who actually understood the words the teacher would use. Fear of failing publicly. Fear of proving, once and for all, that the doubts had been right all along. Normally he would have killed the idea before it could grow. Not for me. I don't have time. I'll never pass the test. But that evening the tiredness felt different. It wasn't just sore muscles. It was the bone-deep exhaustion of living the same small life every single day and pretending it was enough. When the bus finally hissed to a stop, he climbed aboard, still turning the conversation over in his mind. He found a window seat and watched the city lights streak past like shooting stars, everyone else racing toward somewhere while he always seemed to stay in place. At home he took the coldest shower of his life, then picked up the old cracked phone. The internet crawled, but he waited. He typed the course name with careful thumbs, as if the letters themselves might break. The page loaded slowly. Technical course in industrial maintenance. 1 year. Night classes. Completely free. He read it 3 times. His heart began to race. His mind rushed to build walls. You work 12 hours a day. You'll collapse. Everyone else will be smarter. You'll embarrass yourself. He set the phone down and stared at the ceiling again. The old urge to quit before starting rose like a tide. But this time he didn't run. He sat up, grabbed the worn notebook he used for grocery lists, and opened it to a blank page. He wrote the first question in careful letters. If I keep living exactly like this, where will I be in 5 years? The answer came fast and honest: right here. Maybe worse. Same hands. Same empty pockets. Same quiet regret. Second question. If I try and I fail, what actually happens? He thought for a long time. I'll still have my job. I'll still eat. The pain will feel familiar. Nothing new. Third question, the one that changed everything. And if I try, and it works? He stared at those words until they blurred. For the first time in years, he let himself imagine success without immediately tearing the picture down. The possibility felt fragile, like a candle flame in the wind, but it was there. Real. Breathing. Registration day arrived while the sky was still dark. He woke before the alarm, heart already loud in his chest. He ate plain bread with black coffee, put on the only clean shirt he owned, and left the house before anyone else stirred. 2 buses. Standing the whole first ride, gripping the pole until his knuckles hurt. On the second bus he almost missed his stop because he was silently rehearsing answers to questions that might never come. When he reached the registration building, a line already snaked along the sidewalk. People of every age held folders, printed resumes, nervous smiles. He felt the old instinct to turn around and disappear. He felt small, underdressed, underprepared, but he stayed. Because everyone in that line was also carrying something heavy. Everyone was gambling on a chance. When his turn came, his palms were slick with sweat. His voice came out quieter than he wanted. He handed over his documents, filled the form with slow, careful handwriting, and walked out with a simple white receipt in his hand. No fireworks. No celebration. Just the quiet weight of a piece of paper that said, "You showed up." Nothing outside had changed. The rent was still due. The fridge was still almost empty. But inside, something had shifted forever. He was no longer only reacting to life. He had made a choice. And sometimes that single choice, made on an ordinary Tuesday, is the only difference between a life that stays small and a life that quietly becomes extraordinary. The months that followed tested every limit he thought he had. The course hadn't even officially started, yet he already felt the coming weight in his bones. 12-hour factory shifts by day, 3-hour classes at night, crowded buses, maybe 4 hours of sleep if he was lucky. On the first evening he walked into the classroom with his heart hammering. White walls, clean desks, tools neatly arranged on benches. Some students were already speaking the language of the trade, volts, relays. Schematics, like it was their native tongue. He sat in the very back row, trying to become invisible. The teacher began with basic electricity. It sounded like another language. He wrote down every word anyway, hand cramping, mind spinning. On the long ride home he opened the notebook under the dim bus light and tried to understand what he had just copied. Most of it looked like hieroglyphs. He arrived home near 11, ate whatever was left, showered in cold water, and fell into bed. The alarm screamed at 5. The first 3 months lived on the edge of collapse. There were nights he stared at the ceiling and seriously considered quitting. No one was forcing him to be there. The bed felt so warm. The pillow so soft. But every single time the weakness rose, he remembered the bus stop. He remembered the 3 questions in the notebook. And he forced himself up. He couldn't study like the others. They had free time, family support, previous knowledge. He had urgency and exhaustion. So he stole minutes everywhere. During lunch at the factory he sat alone in a corner, notebook open while others scrolled on their phones. At first he felt embarrassed, like an outsider, but soon the shame melted into pure focus. After class he stayed behind to ask questions, voice small but steady. Sometimes teachers answered patiently. Sometimes they sighed. He asked anyway. At home he built a tiny study corner on the kitchen table. 1 strong lamp, the notebook always open, 2 pens in case one ran dry. When the old phone's internet worked, he watched explanation videos on low volume, replaying sections until the concept stopped swimming. Progress wasn't beautiful. It was stubborn. His first major test brought a mediocre grade. Not failure, but far from impressive. That night he sat longer at the kitchen table, not to punish himself, but to study where he had gone wrong. He realized intelligence wasn't the missing piece, method was. So he changed. Smaller daily goals. Better notes. Review every single night, no matter how tired. Discipline slowly replaced motivation. He no longer waited to feel like studying. He simply studied. At the factory, small changes began. One afternoon a machine stopped with a simple fault. Normally he would have called a senior technician. This time he remembered something from class, took a breath, and asked permission to try. His hands shook at first. The supervisor watched from a distance. He failed twice. On the 3rd try the machine hummed back to life. The supervisor gave one short nod. That nod felt bigger than any trophy. Slowly, trust grew. More complex tasks came his way. He made mistakes, fixed them, wrote everything down. While others did the minimum, he asked why things worked the way they did. He became the guy who stayed 10 minutes late to understand. The internship offer arrived almost quietly. One of the instructors had noticed his consistency and recommended him. The pay was modest, but it was a door opening. The new rhythm was brutal. Factory, internship, night class, study until eyes burned. Some weeks he felt his body and mind reaching their absolute limit. Yet something inside had fundamentally changed. He no longer saw himself as a victim of circumstances. He saw himself as a man under construction. His greatest advantage wasn't sudden genius or lucky connections. It was the simple, unbreakable ability to keep going when everything hurt. By the end of the course his grades sat among the highest in the class, not because he was the smartest, but because he was the one who never stopped showing up. The company where he interned offered him a full contract. Not glamorous, not high-paying, But real, stable, earned. On the day he signed the papers, he stepped outside the building and stood on the sidewalk for a long minute. Cars rushed past. People hurried by without noticing him. To the world he was just another young man with a folder under his arm. Inside, he was someone who had walked through fire and come out carrying quiet steel in his spine. Years later he drove back to that same dirt road on a cloudy afternoon. The sky hung low, holding rain it hadn't decided to release. The houses looked smaller now, some freshly painted, others still wearing their old cracks like scars. He slowed the car, a reliable, modest sedan he had bought with careful planning and many nights of spreadsheets, and parked in front of the old house. The gate creaked exactly the same way. The yard seemed to have shrunk. He stepped out, closed the car door softly, and simply stood there breathing. Inside, his mother was in the kitchen. The new refrigerator hummed quietly instead of rattling. No more buckets under leaks. The walls wore fresh paint. When she saw him, her smile was soft and full of everything words could never carry. They talked about ordinary things, work, the neighbors, the price of rice. Normal life. Beautiful life. He had kept studying after the contract. Short courses. Specializations. He saved a portion of every paycheck. He said no to things he couldn't afford. He made careful investments, lost a little, learned more. At work he arrived early, observed, asked questions. Promotions came, not in flashes, but in steady steps. More responsibility. Slightly better salary. The chance to lead small teams. Leading felt strange at first. The boy who once sat in the back row now stood in front, guiding others. He taught the way he had learned, with patience, with example, with respect. When younger colleagues asked how he had risen so quickly, he never painted pretty pictures. He simply said, "I started with nothing but I never stopped." One quiet evening in his new apartment he sat on the balcony looking out at the city lights. He remembered the nights he had come home covered in grease, certain that this would be his forever. He remembered the registration line, the hard tests, the first paycheck from the internship, the day he signed the contract with shaking hands. Every single piece had looked small by itself. Together they had built something solid and real. A few days later he returned once more to the old neighborhood, this time on foot. He walked to the bus stop where everything had changed and sat on the same concrete bench. He closed his eyes. If anyone had passed by, they would have seen only an ordinary man resting in silence. But inside, a straight line connected that moment to the boy he had once been, tired, doubtful, but still walking. He no longer hated the hard years. He didn't worship them either. He understood them. The scarcity had hurt. The humiliations had left marks. But that hard ground was also where his deepest roots had grown. If life had been easy, he might never have learned discipline. He might never have learned to listen more than he spoke. He might never have discovered how strong he could become when no one was watching. The greatest victory wasn't the job title or the modest savings account. It was the way he now carried himself, head up, eyes forward, no longer apologizing for taking up space in the world. Before he left, he ran his hand gently across the concrete bench, a silent thank you to the place where his real life had quietly begun. He walked back to his car, sat for a moment with the engine off. No music, no notifications, just the soft sound of wind moving through the trees. He thought about the young man who had once sat right here, pockets empty, heart heavy, wondering if he would ever be enough. If he could speak to that boy now, he wouldn't offer grand advice. He would simply say the same two words that had carried him through every dark night. Keep going. Then he turned the key, the engine purred to life, and he drove forward, not to prove anything to the world, but because he finally knew, deep in his bones, that he was capable of building his own path. Step by step, in silence, with the strength that had been forged exactly on the days he had almost given up.